No, and as a dad, I would have done what anybody told me, the medical staff, the nurse, the janitor.
You did.
It would just be like, do this. I'm like, all my critical thinking went away. Welcome to With You Podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
I'm a marriage and family therapist and professor.
And I'm a birth doula and educator.
And we're married to each other. We've raised 4 kids, and we're in professions, as you see, that deal with coming alongside people.
Right. So in this podcast, we're going to share what we've learned about relationships and life transitions. We'll do that by sharing our own experiences, by interviewing people who have a great story to tell. Mm-hmm. And we've got some expert interviews to give us some even better information.
It's going to be so good. Let's get started.
Please join us.
So I'm excited about today because today I'm going to interview Tara.
Oh, boy.
So you get to be the expert and I can be the interviewer.
Okay.
So we'll see how this goes. This may be our last podcast.
Yeah. Bye.
It's been good knowing you. No, I think it'd be interesting for us to maybe this one and another one talk about kind of what we do in our day jobs.
Oh, yeah.
When we're not doing podcasting.
I've been told I can't share all the information about what I do in my day job.
Well, we don't want to leave marks on people. So what do you do?
So I'm a doula.
Okay, so you
should
know
I
what?
explain the elevator speech?
Yeah, I don't have any, I'll pretend. I don't know. What is a doula? I've never heard that word before.
Common question. Most people can confuse what a doula does with what a midwife does. It has to do with birth. First of all, the word doula is a Greek word that means servant.
Oh,
usually
really?
Woman servant. So that word got applied to birth work in terms of a woman who is serving a family as they're preparing for birth and in the middle of their birth experience.
Okay.
So I prepare people for the birth of their child. And most of all, what you're aware of that I do when I come home tired in the middle of the night is I attend them in the labor to provide informational support, basically explaining what might be happening, what their options are, and then hands-on comfort if they're trying to go through labor unmedicated or if they're having medication, it's providing them with information about their choices.
So, Tara, what if they want an epidural or they know they're having a C-section?
Yeah, that's a common misconception about what doulas do. So a lot of people do think that we're just there for the people who want a completely unmedicated, what some people term as a natural birth.
Yeah.
But we're there for people, whatever their choices are. We don't have our own goals or plans for how their births go. So we are there for people. We're cheering them on if they want an epidural. We're helping them choose when a good time for that is. And we're hired by people who know they're having a C-section too. So we provide support in whatever circumstances that are going to happen for their birth.
So it's whatever, wherever. It can be a home birth. Well, not wherever, but like at home or at the hospital or at a birthing center. There's like women's birthing centers.
All of those things. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I attend births in people's homes and in hospital, most of the time in the hospitals, because that's the percentage of, most people have their babies in the hospitals. So I attend births in hospitals all over Chicagoland. Yeah. Like, I don't know how many, but at least 20. And birth centers and even occasionally in a car. That's a story for another time. That wasn't intentional.
No. So it's planned and not planned places, but you're collaborating with the medical field.
Right. And the point is that we support the family's goals for their birth, no matter what their plan for pain management is and their vision for their birth. We're there to support their vision. Yeah. So that can be lots of different ways. And of course, if their plan changes from what they originally had intended, we're there to make that as comfortable and positive as possible.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, because I think when we first started talking about this, I thought, it's only home births and that it's
a lot of people think
against medical kind of community, but it really isn't.
No. I mean, that's another question we get a lot is people who are anxious about being in a medical setting. Sometimes we'll be asked in an interview if we'll advocate for them. And sometimes people think that means we're going to come between them and the medical staff. And that's not our scope of practice at all. In fact, our goal is to have harmony with everybody who's involved with the birth. That's the best thing for the birthing family. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're there to help facilitate. So we really work on having good relationships with the medical providers. And that's important to the person who's giving birth, that their atmosphere, that everybody gets along and that we're on the same page. And when people say, will you advocate for me? We have to have a conversation about what that looks like. Yeah, we're helping them to follow their vision for the birth, but it's in a way where we want to help them find their own voice.
Yeah, you're empowering them. I know you talk about...
That word means a lot of different things to different people.
Okay, so maybe that's not the right thing. So you're reminding them of the birth plan that they wrote and saying, hey, this might be a place to have that conversation.
Well, somewhat, but also just things come up. Whenever things come up, we're there to remind them, hey, you could ask for a few minutes to ask some questions or to think about this. So we're helping them make sure at all times, what we feel is a positive birth experience is when people feel fully supported and they know all their options and they feel like a full participant in their healthcare. So that's our goal.
Okay. So that's really your side of it with the patient or with the mother and the partner. What does it look like for the medical staff? Like, how do you think the medical staff feels about having doulas in the delivery room?
Well, that can vary. Of course, in a home birth setting, we're welcomed with open arms. The midwives, we usually get there before the midwives, and it's a very collaborative situation. And every provider is different, but we work on good relationships and we have friendships with a lot of the providers because we work alongside them so often. We see it as a teamwork situation, and that's what we work on making happen.
So you do kind of when people find out they're pregnant, probably surprised, and then the first thing they do, besides calling their partner, is call you.
Well, say, sometimes.
Would you be a doula?
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure I get this. Your job is to educate, like, what the process is, not like delivering the baby, but giving them information, anticipating the birth, and then pain management and support and being with them.
Yeah, good one.
During the
birth we do provide them with a lot of information before the birth, some people hire us the minute they take the pregnancy test. That's usually our repeat clients. A lot of people don't find out what doula support is until they're well into their third trimester. So we've been hired as late as 38 weeks or even a little bit later, and we have a little less time to get that information in. But a lot of what we do to help people have a better experience is to understand what's going to happen, what to expect, how different birthing locations will provide different options, and how that'll affect their birth experience.
I've learned so much from our dining room table as we talk about women's health and the birth process and all of it. It's just fascinating. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But how did you find out about being a doula Inc? Because we didn't have. I was there at our 4 births. We did not have that kind of support.
You were my doula. You did a good job.
Oh really?
You did.
Oh, thanks. But I didn't feel like I did a great job.
I still do remember the look of fear in your eyes, which is why dads appreciate doulas too.
Yeah, it's hard to see the person that you love suffering or in pain and go, would you like ice chips? And that's the extent of the comfort support that I was able to provide.
We didn't have that kind of, we didn't know what that was.
No, we didn't.
And it probably wasn't very easy to find then. It's become more popular. There's a lot more doulas around.
Well, we did give birth out in the cornfields and...
Well, not literally.
Oh, no, that's right.
We gave birth in hospitals for all 4 of our kids, 3 different states. So we had lots of experiences. Yeah. But no, we took the childbirth classes, we read the books, but there's a lot to be said about having continuous support in person when you're going through that, because you can read things and really not remember them when you're in the middle of contractions.
No, and as a dad, I would have done what anybody told me, the medical staff, the nurse, the janitor.
You did.
It would just be like, do this. I'm like, all my critical thinking went away, and it was just like, I'll do whatever, which it would have been nice having kind of like a coach, a birth coach. There to
and that's another good way of describing what we do. In a previous life, before I did doula work, I was an editor, so very different profession. And I didn't get excited about in being involved in other people's birth experiences until we had our own and realized it wasn't everything we thought it would be. We felt kind of on our own in the hospital, felt like the stuff we had read didn't apply once we
Yeah.
were in, in the situation ourselves. And so I learned about childbirth education. That's what I started getting trained to do. And in the
Okay.
process of that, my training organization also trains doulas, and I discovered what that was. And it's somebody who is doing the work of a childbirth educator and a hands-on coach and comforter, encourager, advocate, guide. And that was completely my jam. Because the first time I witnessed a birth, nice neighbors of ours agreed to let me just come and observe as part of my training for childbirth education.
Yeah.
And in the process of being in the hospital and getting to hands-on say, oh yeah, that's normal, that's good, she's doing a great job, or here, Dad, why don't you press her back right here? I realized that's where it's at. I loved it.
So good. And
Yeah.
there's a new light in your eyes
Mm-hmm.
in that you didn't have editing. Editing, there was a
Yeah.
little bit of like sadness in your
Yeah, well,
eyes.
finding mistakes versus finding people's strengths,
Yeah.
really.
It's a huge shift and kind of
Yeah.
just reorienting kind of the purpose of what you do in life as a calling, as a vocation. It's been so fun to kind of witness that and see the joy that comes from it, even though it's dealing with people in pain.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the biggest shift because I don't like pain.
Yeah.
In my personal life, I think most people tend to avoid it and tend to think pain is the worst thing that we could experience on this earth. But I've learned a lot about pain, which you appreciate because as a therapist, that's your mindset
Yeah.
as well. But not that I appreciate pain, but that I especially
Purposeful
the
pain.
purposeful pain, functional pain
Yeah, that's a good
is
term.
really different than pathological pain. And
Yeah.
when I explain that to my families that I work with, sometimes a light goes on in their eyes too, especially when I'm telling the dads who maybe were in sports or the moms who, have run a marathon or something. And you say, look, this is an athletic event. This is not somebody pulling your teeth out without anesthetic. That's not a fair comparison. This is your muscle, your whole body, your physiology working to get your child in your arms. And that process is created. We've all been born. All of us have come out in one way or another. And so when you see it from that perspective that this is going to happen, it's something I can prepare for. My body was created to do this. And I have people around me in case there's a complication, because of course it doesn't always go perfectly. But most times when it's left uninterrupted, it does.
Yeah, that's been the most amazing thing is you've helped recalibrate for me. Pregnancy is not a disorder. It's not a medical problem. It's a normal developmental process that the body really wants to do most of the time on its own, or there's a natural process to that. And how do you support that with resources available if there is a problem? But that's a different mindset, I think, especially in the West, here in the US, that birth is a medical procedure and almost disease, like
Well,
pregnancy is a
yeah, it
disease.
can feel to people like an accident waiting to happen. And I mean, strangely and sadly, in our country, with the most medical advances, we have some of the worst outcomes for moms and babies who are giving birth. So it doesn't show that all of the interventions that we're doing are actually creating better outcomes. So there's a movement to push back to, well, I think it keeps going back and forth. It seems to move towards let's leave it uninterrupted and be present in case of complication. And then our system is set up to control the process. So it keeps getting pushed back to, let's induce everybody at 39 weeks and let's, put a time limit on labor. And all of these things really change the process and change the outcomes.
Yeah, could you really quickly kind of go through that cascade? And we talk about the cascade effect, that idea of induction being a common thing, and it's helpful at times. It's an important medical intervention, but just how when we move from a healthy kind of model of birth to an intervention model of birth, what all goes into that?
Well, I think to think about that, and I mean, we could talk about interventions all day and how one might lead to another, but the place that helps to come from is thinking about birth in terms of physiology and normal natural physiology and what's supposed to be happening if you left a woman alone and if the process unfolded in the way it usually does in nature, what should be happening and how do we interrupt that even just by our location of birth. So the physiology is a magical thing when you understand the hormonal process that initiates birth, and science doesn't even completely understand it. What we know, I mean, I think that the most common understanding of how birth starts is that the baby initiates it. Something in the maturation of the lungs, releases something that interacts with the mother's physiology, and that starts the process. So just at the get-go, if that's what's supposed to happen and we start it medically at a different time and we don't know how soon the baby would have started the process, we're already interrupting that flow that would have started the hormonal,
Wow, that's cool.
cascade. Yeah.
I learn something every time we talk about birth. I didn't know that. And I have a developmental degree, so I'm feeling I need to do some more reading.
Yeah, it's pretty cool when you think about the mother and the baby and how closely connected they are to each other's physiology. So one deeply affects the other in the process of birth. And in the process, we know about the magical oxytocin. You know a lot about oxytocin.
I love oxytocin.
It's the love hormone.
Oh, yeah. And the connection, the attachment.
The connection hormone.
The attachment drug.
Yeah. So people are surprised to learn that hormone that's the one that makes us fall in love is also the same hormone that creates the strong contractions that get the baby out. So that create that intensity of labor. And we need that to be at a strong level to create strong contractions to get the baby out. But oxytocin is also a shy hormone. So when I prepare people for birth, I tell them, when you're having a really special date with somebody that you love, you set a sensory stage for that. Usually you're going to have lower lights at a special date night. Imagine a really fancy.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
I'll bring out Barry White.
So low lights, you might have music playing, you might have good tasting food, touch is usually involved, all these sensory things that enhance oxytocin and the feeling of safety and security and privacy. And all of those things help the flow of this large dose of oxytocin. The same exact conditions are necessary for oxytocin in labor. So it makes sense that the location that we choose sometimes is kind of the exact opposite of that setting, where we're arriving at the hospital where there's fluorescent lights and there's strangers coming in and talking to us and beeping machines, and our adrenaline and our cortisol are rising. Those directly conflict with oxytocin. And so sometimes labor stops, or it slows down, or it becomes interrupted. And sometimes it's just because we're still not doing anything that would be called an intervention, but even just the setting is interrupting that flow and that cascade of hormones that are necessary.
So that's why sometimes you go early with them and set the mood in terms of the hospital room, and kind of after the intake and all of that, turning down the lights, getting their playlist. And it makes more sense now, because I always joke around of like, do you have like Salt and Peppers? Push it real good. And that's the end song. But kind of the music to relax, to get into that state where there's safety, security for the oxytocin to start with the contractions.
Yeah. That's the
contractions.
Or
attractions.
Or attraction.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that a doula usually does in the hospital room is set the mood. And it can be seen as like, oh yeah, hippy dippy trippy doula
Well, I
stuff.
did see you outside in the parking lot hugging a tree before you came in.
Right. And howling at the moon and stuff.
Yep. That sounds like you.
So people can see that as just, okay, whatever, if you need your fairy lights and your underwater dolphin birth and whatever.
Yeah. Tell me about the science behind that, not just the hippy dippy part.
Right. I mean, neuroscience tells us that we need certain conditions for certain brain activity. And in labor, you go into, actually, you'll find this fascinating, but I don't know enough about it to try to explain it here. But read about brain waves in labor, because they change. You go into these deeper brain waves. That's why people go into kind of a almost an altered state when they're in deep active labor where they can't answer questions.
Yeah,
They're not
they
using,
turn inward,
they
right?
very
Almost.
much go internal, can't use their thinking brain.
Hmm.
And we interrupt that by asking constant questions, and getting them out of that state also interrupts the whole flow of their hormonal process
Yeah.
that allows labor to move forward well. So setting the stage helps to make people feel less, less interrupted, more secure and safe, private. The same conditions a mammal needs to give birth. And if you ever lived on a farm, or I had dogs and cats growing
Yeah, I
up,
had
that,
fish. Yeah, it
yeah, you
doesn't
didn't see
really,
that.
that's not,
Yeah,
I'm
they
pretty
lay
sure we didn't
eggs.
have a mammal fish. That would have been a dolphin. We just had
No.
goldfish.
Well, when I was little, we had a dog that had puppies when I was young in our house. And when we lived in Africa, I had a cat that had kittens all the time. They don't come into the middle of a room that's brightly lit with a bunch of people and just have their babies. They always wait till nighttime. It's dark. They go find a closet and a warm spot. And we kind of need similar conditions to that to feel safe, because, there's a part of our brain as parents, even now, that's always assessing, is this situation safe? Is this place safe for me to have my child, or to protect my family? And so there's part of our brain that's doing that when we're giving birth.
That's remarkable. And we could spend hours and hours on this. I do want to move to one other. I have two more questions for you. One is, well, maybe it's a statement, not a question. Of for those of you that don't know Tara, in everything she does, it's about bringing people together. Whether it is editing and bringing together people in terms of readership and good prose, but in the birth process of bringing together the treatment team, but also the couple, it's always fascinating to me how on some level, you're like a couples therapist as well. I mean, I'm a little jealous. You get to be an educator, you get to be a coach, and then you're also a relational specialist in the doula role with the couple during and after, just in terms of the storytelling of the process, the birth
Yeah,
process.
it's one of the things I love about it, is being there in person, because people are under stress when they're in labor and experiencing things they've never felt before, and seeing their partner in a way they've never seen them before.
Yeah.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
usually.
There's usually a lot
Yeah.
of language. I mean,
Yeah.
we'd have to
Well,
mark this one explicit if we actually had like a birth
I,
process happening.
I always tell people everything's forgiven in labor, and I will not tell. I don't tell what
Yeah.
people say in the process of pushing their baby out. But yeah, I get to see couples in a very intimate setting and experiencing things that are very stressful sometimes, having to make decisions together and seeing each other go through stressful times. And so I love enhancing the positive parts. When I leave, I always tell them, I think you're an amazing team.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job together. I take pictures during the birth, and I don't take pictures when the dad's in the corner texting. I take pictures when he's got his hand on her head,
So
the
good.
moments of connection,
Yeah.
so that when they look back, they can remember we did this together.
Yeah, we as therapists, we highlight the successes. You can be kind of problem saturated or resilient and
Yeah.
kind of positive saturated focus, and you really do that regardless of the outcome, whether it's a vaginal birth or a C-section. There's this connection that you foster that's just beautiful, and it's fun to brag on you because I know you wouldn't do it for yourself. How do people get in touch with doula? Like, how do you find a doula? Is there 1-800 doula me,
It
or
kind of is. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. There's a great website called doulamatch.net that, I think that's just for the US.
Okay.
But doulas can register on there for their area. So you can type in your area code or not your area code, your zip code,
Okay.
and it'll show you the doulas that are within a certain radius of your area, and they have their availability listed. So that's one way. Word of mouth is always good. Asking your
Yeah.
medical provider if they've ever used a doula and who they recommend is good. So where a lot of my referrals come from OBs and midwives.
Yeah, and people can find you and your team, right? Because it's important, not just relationships with the mom and the partner, but having a team, because you're only one woman and there's only so many births and nights you can
Yeah,
stay
I
up.
always try to be more than one.
I know one is quite enough for me. Thank you very much. But like, how do people find you and your team who all have the same kind of philosophy and
Yeah, well, in the
skill set.
Chicagoland area, my doula services are under Family First Birth Services and also With You Parenting. So people can find us there if they're in Chicago, and we do consults too. If people aren't sure they want a doula there in the room, we also do just the prep, like helping you find a great provider that matches with your philosophy and helping you prepare for what to expect. But in any area of the country that you live, there's probably somebody that serves that area. So word of mouth is great to go on. Facebook moms groups, they usually have a lot to say.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna ask you, like, what questions should they ask? But it sounds like it's about goodness of fit, as you were talking about. It's finding someone that you feel safe with, that you kind of vibe. I think the kids say
Vibes,
vibe
yeah.
with. I don't think that's the right use of that word, but finding a good fit for you that they're. And if you interview a doula and it doesn't feel great or connection, to find that good fit, right? Would that be
Yeah,
the most
I think
important
that's
thing?
number one. I mean, that fits with, this is our whole focus in life, is that relational connection's one of the most important things in life. So that's why I do what I do. And that's why we're talking about it today, because it's not just about having some technician that's going to be there to give you back rub during labor. It's a relationship, and it's somebody that hopefully can enhance the experience for you with information and personal support. So you have to feel comfortable with that person. You're going to spend some hours with that person. So, the fit is important relationally, but experience is good too. I really recommend that you look for somebody who's certified. And so you can always ask them about that or look that up on their
Yeah.
website.
Are there certain certifications?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of companies that certify, so
Okay.
that's too long a list to go into, but maybe we'll list something on the
Yeah,
show notes.
that sounds good.
But yeah, I think fit is the most important thing, that you feel like you could trust that person when you're at your most vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, it's been great interviewing you. This went better than I thought. I
You were
could do
afraid I was
this.
going to talk about like placentas and weird stuff like
Oh
that,
yeah,
right?
and mucus plugs
I
and
could talk
all the
about birth all day, so we're going to have more episodes where we tell actual birth stories, but
yeah.
we'll save that for a little
The
later.
one thing that I just require, I support you completely in all of this, but when you come home from a birth, you need to do what first?
Wash my clothes.
Wash your clothes,
Take a
'cause
shower.
you're covered in all sorts of stuff, and maybe that's a great place to end. So thank you for coming in and interviewing
Yeah,
today, Tara.
thanks for chatting.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk later. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
We invite you to visit our show notes page and website for more resources and information.
If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast and share with your friends. That would be a huge favor to us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.